One of the biggest misconceptions about the Israel-Palestine conflict is that it's been raging for centuries, that it's all about ancient religious hatred. While religion does play a part, this conflict is mainly about two groups of people claiming the same land, and in truth it only dates back about a century, to the early 1900s. Back then, the region along the eastern Mediterranean, what we now know as Israel and Palestine, had been under Ottoman rule for centuries. It was a religiously diverse area, mostly Muslims and Christians, with a small Jewish population, communities that generally lived together in peace. But the region was changing in two key ways. First, more locals began to see themselves not just as Arabs, but as Palestinians, forming a distinct national identity. At the same time, in Europe, a growing number of Jews joined the Zionist movement, believing Judaism was not only a religion, but also a nationality that deserved its own homeland. After centuries of persecution, many Jews felt a Jewish state was their only guarantee of safety, and they viewed their ancient homeland in the Middle East as the right place to build it. In the early decades of the 20th century, tens of thousands of European Jews migrated there. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and Britain took over the area, calling it the British Mandate for Palestine. At first, Britain permitted Jewish immigration, but as more Jews arrived and began forming farming settlements, tensions between Jews and Arabs started to rise. Both sides committed acts of violence. By the 1930s, Britain limited Jewish immigration. In response, Jewish militias formed to resist both Arab attacks and British authority. Then came the Holocaust, pushing many more Jews to flee Europe for British-controlled Palestine, and inspiring global sympathy for the idea of a Jewish state. In 1947, as fighting between Jews and Arabs escalated, the United Nations proposed splitting British Palestine into two separate nations, one Jewish called Israel and one Arab called Palestine. Jerusalem, sacred to Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike, was to become a special international zone. The plan was meant to create a Jewish homeland, grant Palestinians independence, and end the escalating violence that the British could no longer control. Jewish leaders accepted the plan and declared the creation of Israel. Israel won that war. But during the fighting, it expanded far beyond the UN's proposed borders, capturing western Jerusalem and much of the territory designated for Palestine. In doing so, Israel displaced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, creating a refugee crisis whose descendants now number around 7 million. After the war, Israel controlled most of the land, except for Gaza, governed by Egypt and the West Bank, held by Jordan. This marked the start of the decades-long Arab-Israeli conflict. During this time, many Jews in Arab-majority countries fled or were expelled, resettling in Israel. Then in 1967, Israel fought another war with neighboring Arab states. When it ended, Israel had captured the Golan Heights from Syria, the West Bank from Jordan, and both Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. Now Israel was occupying Palestinian territories, including Jerusalem and its sacred sites. This left Israel in control of millions of Palestinians, a people it had been in conflict with for decades. In 1978, Israel and Egypt signed the U.S.-brokered Camp David Accords. Soon after, Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt as part of their peace deal. At the time, this was extremely controversial in the Arab world. Egypt's President Anwar Sadat was assassinated partly because of it. Still, it marked a major shift, the beginning of the end of the wider Arab-Israeli wars. Over the following decades, other Arab states gradually moved toward peace or normalization with Israel, even if they never signed official treaties. But Israel's army continued occupying the West Bank and Gaza, turning the conflict into a direct Israeli-Palestinian struggle. The Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, was founded in the 1960s to push for a Palestinian state and fought against Israel, at times through terrorism. At first, the PLO demanded control of all of former British Palestine, effectively calling for Israel's elimination. Years of fighting followed, including Israel's 1982 invasion of Lebanon to drive the PLO out of Beirut. Eventually, the PLO agreed to divide the land between Israel and Palestine, but the conflict persisted. Meanwhile, things were changing inside the Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories. Israelis began moving in. These settlers built homes in the West Bank and Gaza, regardless of Palestinian opposition. Some moved for religious reasons, others to claim land for Israel, and some simply because housing was cheaper, often subsidized by the Israeli government. Some settlements grew into cities with thousands of residents. Others were small communities deep inside Palestinian areas. These settlements were protected by soldiers, displacing Palestinians and dividing their towns. Short-term, they made life under occupation harder. Long-term, they fragmented Palestinian territory, making independence increasingly difficult. Today, hundreds of thousands of settlers live in occupied territory, even though the international community deems them illegal. By the late 1980s, Palestinian frustration erupted into the Intifada, the Arabic word for uprising. It began with protests and boycotts, but soon turned violent, and Israel responded with heavy force. The first Intifada left a few hundred Israelis and over 1,000 Palestinians dead. Around the same time, a group of Palestinians in Gaza, viewing the PLO as too secular and willing to compromise, founded Hamas, a militant organization dedicated to Israel's destruction. By the early 1990s, both sides saw the need for peace. Their leaders signed the Oslo Accords, meant to begin Israel's gradual withdrawal and pave the way for an independent Palestinian state. The Oslo Accords created the Palestinian Authority, allowing limited self-governance in certain areas. But extremists on both sides, opposed the agreement. Hamas carried out suicide bombings to sabotage peace talks. On the Israeli side, far-right protesters denounced Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, calling him a traitor. Not long after signing the second Oslo deal, Rabin was assassinated by a right-wing Israeli in Tel Aviv. Negotiations dragged on for years, but even the major Camp David summit of 2000 failed. Palestinians began to believe peace would never come, sparking a much bloodier Second Intifada. When it ended a few years later, roughly 1,000 Israelis and 3,200 Palestinians had died. The Second Intifada deeply changed the conflict. Israelis grew skeptical that peace was possible. Politics shifted to the right, and Israel built walls and checkpoints to control Palestinian movement. Instead of resolving the conflict, Israel focused on managing it. Palestinians, meanwhile, felt negotiation and violence had both failed, leaving them trapped under occupation with no clear future. In 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza, but Hamas seized control after a brief civil war with the Palestinian Authority, splitting Gaza and the West Bank politically. Israel responded with a strict blockade on Gaza, pushing unemployment to nearly 40%. This is the situation we know today, relatively recent, yet unbearable for Palestinians. In the West Bank, expanding settlements continue to displace Palestinians. Many protest or resist. Most simply try to live normal lives. In Gaza, Hamas and other militant groups frequently clash with Israel, conflicts that overwhelmingly kill Palestinians, including civilians. Inside Israel, most citizens have grown apathetic. The occupation keeps the conflict distant from their daily lives, punctuated only by brief but terrible violence. There's little political will left for peace. No one knows what happens next. Perhaps a third intifada, perhaps the collapse of the Palestinian Authority. But everyone agrees this situation can't last. Israel's occupation is unsustainable, and unless something major changes, what comes next will likely be far worse.